Shalom, my friends. Shalom, my enemies. This is our old pal, Rabbi Sol Solomon, founder and spiritual leader of Temple Sons of Bitches. And we are here today, forget the name, that's not actually the name he uses, but we're going to be here with a theater person, a man whose actual name is Steve. Well, we'll ask him about this. What the hell is with the name thing? His name, well, we'll call him Steve until we can ask him. And he's going to be talking to me, Rabbi Sol, here in the neighborhood. I am the founder and spiritual leader of Temple Sons of Bitches in Great Neck, New York. And I'll be talking to this man. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He and his wife created years and years of theater and comedy, doing it off-off-Broadway in places, I think, like La Mama and Theater for the New City. And now he's got his own solo show at a place called the Alchemical Theater. It's over on West 17th Street, a small theater there, where he'll be talking about his marriage and his working career with this woman, Naimah Hassan, when they were Epstein and Hassan, a.k.a. the Black and the Jew. And they, of course, talked about being an interracial couple and being married and racism in America in funny ways. The sad part is she passed away last year, and now he's still doing theater to honor her and to talk about her and their lives together. So, ladies and gentlemen, the one thing, first of all, Steve, can you hear me?
I hear you fine.
How come I can't see you?
I don't know.
Make sure, can you get your video up? This would be kind of nice. Check your camera there. It's this thing with there you go.
Right.
There.
Right.
Yeah, you're math illiterate and but literate enough to be writing plays. So this is very good. Shalom to you, Steve. So I do have to ask. The big confusion there is when I look you up and things, and I look you up your whole address. What's Krantz and where did Epstein come from? You're Epstein, aren't you?
Well, actually, my family's name was Krantz. So when Naimah and I started performing together, we wanted to have, we tried Krantz and Hassan and Krantz, and we didn't like the sound very much. At that time, my sister was married to a guy named Epstein. So I said, you know, Epstein and Hassan has a much better ring to it than Krantz and Hassan. And so we became Epstein and Hassan. What's very strange is I kept the Epstein name, and my sister actually divorced that guy. So I've had her Epstein name much longer than her. So it was just a stage thing. Plus, Epstein and Hassan sounded more Jewish.
Yeah, go for it. Oh, you're the only person in the universe who changes his name to sound more Jewish than
I wanted to sound as much Jewish as I possibly could. So
I see that.
Hassan, I like that sound. So that, but what was interesting through the years, whenever we performed, female MCs would always call us Hassan and Epstein, which I always thought was a very interesting thing. Because men never did that. We always said our name is Epstein and Hassan, but that was a female thing. They wanted us to be Hassan and Epstein. So
I get it. It's woke. It's female. It's black too. This was the thing. So many questions to ask about your early years together. So you might as well, let's even roll it back to the beginning. You were essentially a door manager at a bunch of jazz clubs, very particularly Sweet Basil, which I don't even know if it exists anymore. But and you know what? Let's even roll that back. What was it like running the door at a jazz club? It wasn't just like, you weren't a bouncer. You were more like doing the tally and the intake, or what?
Well, I basically did that for 35 years. I was a doorman / manager at Sweet Basil, at the Blue Note, which is a very famous jazz club in New York, the Knitting Factory. Basically, what I did was I was the person who was sort of the in-between between the staff, the musicians, publicists, and customers. I was the front man that you came to, and of course, the owners of the club. So although some clubs call it a doorman, some clubs called it a manager, it was basically the same thing. I basically worked around the door, sometimes with bouncers, sometimes just as myself. In those days, I weighed about 260 pounds. Today, I weigh about 150 pounds.
I know, you look like you're going to blow away in the wind.
Well, you know, I've been very stressed since my wife's illness. But anyway, I did that for many years, and I became in a certain way, I don't know if you're a jazz aficionado, but way back in the 1940s, there was a jazz doorman slash MC named Pee Wee Marquette. And in those days, we weren't woke yet, so he was called a midget. And he worked at Bird.
Yeah.
He was a midget. I don't know. Are you allowed to curse on this, or is this?
Oh, fuck yeah.
Okay. Because Lester Young, the famous jazz saxophonist, used to call him half a motherfucker. Because if you didn't tip him, he would mispronounce your name on purpose. But he was very famous on a lot of jazz albums because he would yell out the name of the band. He was very excited, and he's on lots of, not to say millions, lots of jazz albums. And Art Blakey, who was a legendary jazz musician, worked a lot at Sweet Basil, and he took a strong liking to me. And he said that I was the best MC since Pee Wee Marquette. Now, if you don't know jazz, that's meaningless to you, but I've been on a lot of records too, introducing bands. And when I first started working there, Art Blakey told me he doesn't like a jazz announcement like, good evening, please welcome Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. He wanted me to go, please welcome Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, because that's how Pee Wee Marquette did it. And he said, that way you let the squares know it's okay to be excited. So you wake them up because they need to know it's okay. And so, I got to know a lot of jazz legends, and I got to know, especially at the Blue Note, a lot of celebrities, because it's a jazz club, but it's a pop club, people like Tony Bennett and Bette Midler. And I was an MC, but I also dealt with everything that went on during the evening. So that was what I spent my life doing, struggling also to be an artist. So
wow. Were you trying to be a musician or a writer?
Always a comedian. Naimah was a performer. When I met her, she was doing a one-woman show. She was an acting teacher. I mean, I'll tell you a lot about her, of course, but I basically emceed shows, and we were watching. We were already married. We were watching an old clip of Stiller and Meara, and Naimah said, we should try to do that. She goes, you're very funny on stage, and she's a very talented actress and had, a lot of skills. And we just started going to comedy clubs. And later in our career, we actually performed at Joe's Pub, and Stiller and Meara were there. And Jerry Stiller was one of the most kind, generous people to us. He loved what we did, and he was unbelievably supportive and kind. And I never forgot how, through the years, he always stood out in my mind because we started doing that because of them. We said, because that was a Jewish, the Christian Jewish thing.
Yeah.
And we thought we would sort of update it to make it a Black and a Jew. Now, we were a lot more, blue than them. We saw blue meaning, sexual.
Right. Sexy, naughty.
But, people have, occasionally compared us to Stiller and Meara, which always was a big, certainly something.
But the one thing I thought you were going to also tell is that didn't you meet Naimah when she was trying to get into the jazz club? And what did you do and what did she do?
Basically, what happened was I had again introduced the band. She was already in the club. I hadn't, I saw her. She was hanging out at the bar.
You were letting her into the club. Okay, no, right, yeah.
And she heard me do the introduction, and she liked what I did. And she basically told me, and this is, it's a kind of, when I got to know Naimah, it's not so strange. She asked me if I was married, and I said no. She said, well, I don't want you to think I'm too bold, but I live around the corner, and I'd like to get to know you better because I think that you're a very sweet and kind person. And in my mind, she also saw that Art Blakey really liked me. And, in the back of my mind, I was like, wow, Art Blakey just got me laid because she's invited me over to her apartment. And I'm thinking, I lived in Brooklyn in those days. I had to take an hour ride after work on the L train to go home. And it would be nice to have a girlfriend around the corner. So I figured I'd go over there a couple of times. Maybe I would hit it. Maybe I wouldn't hit it. But, whatever. And I ended up staying for 40 years. So,
Wait, from that night on, or you went out and...
I never left. I literally never left her apartment. I mean, we started living together relatively quickly, And years later, she said I married her because she had a rent-stabilized apartment, but I didn't really know she had a at that time. I wasn't thinking in that way.
You just know. Well, no, you were thinking, I have an apartment to stay at tonight, so I have to schlep to the L train and then get a little coffee and my cream. Why not? Let's do this. Let's do this.
Exactly.
But so there weren't cookies involved. I had read an interview that, wow, you're changing the story. I thought the thing was you let her in and she was so kind. The next night she came back, she brought cookies for you.
There's a lot of mixtures to the story. I mean, she did do all those things too. Cause I didn't, the first time I didn't go right into moving and to live with her. She did come she kept building it up. At the beginning, I actually, in all honesty, I wasn't thinking long term. I was, as you just said, I was thinking, once I met her, I thought, okay, maybe 6 months, maybe 6 weeks.
Right.
So she had a vision of us being together right from day one. She said that she just could tell that I was a very kind person. I was very at the door. I always tried to make people feel welcome. That's why I had such a long career, because when you came to the club, you were in my home. That's how I perceived it. And if you gave me an opportunity, if I had to be strict with you, if you were noisy during a show, or, I was not, and I always understood something which is important as a club person. Musicians and people always want guests, but I always was polite within the rules. Like, you might get 2 guests. However, I always knew that I worked for the club. I didn't work for the musicians. I didn't work for the, staff. So that's how you build a career, but I always had I try to treat everybody with respect. That's how I was raised. And, in all my years on the club business, I never had one physical altercation.
Wow. And this is a job where people are probably doing, drinking, bathroom.
Yeah.
Did you partake? I'm sure jazz musicians offered you tons of things to
Actually, do. I did. And this is an interesting thing as the Jewish part of the story, because when I first started at Sweet Basil, I came out of the 70s, and I had a lot of drug behavior. And when I started dating Naimah, my mother started, at first, my parents were not happy about me not being with a Jewish girl more than.
Interesting. They were more concerned about she wasn't of the Jewish, not the skin color. I get that. All right, yeah.
Absolutely. And what happened was, pretty soon after I started seeing Naimah, I stopped using drugs, because she helped me see that I was destroying myself. And my parents saw that, and based on that, they developed, I'm not going to say that they were ever there, although they weren't religious, they were, especially my mother, was extraordinarily a cultural Jewish person. Her being Jewish was very important to her. And, but her son becoming healthy and, changing his life was more important to her. And,
how did Naimah's parents look at you? We always said from the other, what do they think?
Her mother was extremely religious Christian woman, extremely religious. And Naimah's name was really not Naimah Hassan. I tell this story in the show.
Because Naimah sounds like a really Hebrew Jewish name, quite honestly. I was a little surprised.
Naimah came out of the 60s and the 70s. To tell you a quick beginning on Naimah. So she was very affected by the Black liberation movement in the late 60s. And her mother, when she was a young girl, I tell the story in the show. She grew up in Portchester, New York, which is right near Greenwich, Connecticut. So there was a large Black community in Portchester, and Greenwich is one of the richest neighborhoods in America. So the reason being, which I never realized, because even on the Metro North, it's like the next stop, very rich people need people to work on their property.
Maids.
So a lot of Black people moved there. And when Naimah was a little girl, her mother was a cleaning woman for a very rich family in Greenwich. So, but they lived in Portchester. And one day in the summer, Naimah she was like 9 or 10 years old. She went to the local pool. It was hot. And she jumped in the water. And she heard parents saying, "Get out of the water. I'm not going to say the word. There's an N in the water. There's an N in the water." Naimah didn't even know what an N was. She thought it was like a shark. So she got out of the water because she thought there was like an N. Everybody was getting out of the water. She didn't know they were getting out of the water because of her. So when she went home, she told her mother what had happened. And her mother told her the truth. And then she told her, but don't worry because Jesus loves you. Jesus loves you.
Right. Yeah.
And there were photos of Jesus all over her mother's house. And Naimah first.
Wait. There are photos of Jesus. I've never seen an actual photograph of Jesus.
Well, drawings, images.
Yeah. Right.
So anyway, Naimah made.
Who took a Polaroid, like Mary? I'm like, yeah, right.
She made a connection that Jesus was white in the image. He actually, according to her, looked like one of the Allman Brothers. You know, the long blonde hair, blue eyes.
But anyway, and superstar. Yeah.
She told her mom that this bothered her from the time she was a little girl, that the people that called her the N-word looked like the man on the wall. And she never got over that and always had this big issue. Now, in many ways, because Naimah was a very spiritual person, she loved the teachings of Jesus Christ. She didn't like the version of Jesus that we have as she got older and older here in America. A gun-loving, anti-gay, money-loving Jesus.
That's DeSantis, isn't it? No, I'm kidding.
That's American Christianity to a big degree. That is, to me, I don't see the American version of Christianity having anything to do with the teachings of Jesus Christ. I mean, that's just my view, and that was definitely Naimah's view. And she really had that view. So when she came to New York after she graduated from graduate school, she moved to New York to be an actress. The first thing she did was change her name because she no longer wanted to have the name to the people who had enslaved her family. You know, she was very much about politics. When James Brown said he was black and he was proud, she took that to heart. And that was when black people started calling themselves black. Up until then, they were Negroes, all kinds of other names. So Naimah was very affected by that era. That's when she came up. So
what was her so-called slave name or her birth name?
Justine English.
Justine English Hassan.
Well, Hassan wasn't her name either.
Wow.
I messed with her a lot in later years because she took the name. A lot of people thought she took the name Naimah Hassan because she wanted to be a Muslim.
Right.
She took the name Naimah Hassan because she liked the way it sounded. And she thought it was but in later years, whenever we were in an airport, she was always taken off the line because they thought she was a terrorist. Right. So I said to her, that was a great choice of a name here. We were always getting, in trouble everywhere we go. But it was,
please, I have a friend of mine. He can't get on Southwest because his name is Bin Laden Hitler. He's a little Jewish guy, but Bin Laden Hitler can't get.
Change that last name.
Yeah. First name's all right.
The first name, you could call you Bin. But Hitler is a name that has been, you got to get that out.
You got to get that one out of there, yeah.
Somebody ruined that name for history. But so she changed her name. She started performing as doing her shows. And in the mid-1980s in New York, there was an explosion in downtown theater. And a lot of people were doing one-person shows, Eric Bogosian, Reno. And Naimah met Ellen Stewart, who ran La Mama, who was a black woman. And like a legendary figure to a lot of young black writers and actresses. And she took a liking to Naimah. And eventually Naimah did a show at La Mama called What White People Want to Know About Black People, so they watch the Bill Cosby show. Because that was when Bill Cosby had his thing. And
we know Bill Cosby had a thing, but we won't go there. Yeah.
Well, I'll get into that if you want, because what happened was Naimah, her show was reviewed. She did 6 characters in that original show, including a male character named Joe Keys, who was a black jazz drummer based on a lot of misogynistic black men she grew up with around her life. So she did that show. She did it as a one-person show at La Mama, got a really good review. And one night, Bill Cosby actually came to see her perform. And he didn't like her performance at all, because he felt, and he told her that she was very talented, but that she was crude and that she needed to, change the way she was presenting women and black women. Now, in later years, when I found out how he presented women, I was like,
Exactly.
what a hypocritical motherfucker that guy is. Now, I actually knew Bill Cosby from the jazz world because he was a huge jazz fan.
Yeah, he
And
put
he
out
would
a
often
jazz
come.
album or two. He did, yeah.
He was really into, he's serious. I mean, in that respect, he was a serious jazz fan. But I had my own, I can give you this, it's a true story. Bill Cosby, when I worked at Sweet Basil, would often stand with me at the door. He didn't like, he was a move around person. He didn't like to sit down. So he would always do this thing where he would ask a waitress to get him a glass of water. And then when she got him a glass of water, he would either give her a $20 tip or a $100 tip. So one day, as a joke, I'm thinking I'm just going to mess, because he also liked to drink cappuccino, which he would get from there was like an Italian restaurant next door. So I'm thinking as a joke, he's giving everybody tips to get a glass of water. So I brought him a glass of water, trying to, just as a joke, though. I wasn't really expecting a tip. And I noticed at that time that he didn't like that.
Oh.
He didn't like me kind of topping him. Like it was like a comedian, competitive kind of like he's the status guy.
Yeah.
He didn't like it. But I noticed that at that time. And of course, my job wasn't to, get into things with him. But I did notice that. I picked it up because part of being a doorman is that you have to be very perceptive. You have to read people. People are drinking and all kinds of things. So in later years, when all this stuff came out about Bill Cosby, it didn't shock me in the sense that I knew that he liked to play at a very high status kind of thing. He would be the kind. It didn't shock me that he would do what he did.
Now, please tell some other, before we go back to Hassan, and by the way, your show, I want to remind people that tonight is the first night of your solo show, although I imagine she makes appearances on video. Is this true?
Yes.
In this show called, unfortunately, but truthfully, When Your Soulmate Dies. It's running now through late June at the Alchemical Theater over on West 17th Street. I've never heard of this theater before, but I don't know if it's new or they renamed it from something.
They used to be on 14th Street. It used to be on the Alchemical Theater is run by a guy named Carlo Altamori, who was a member of the Living Theater.
Oh my gosh! Wow! Yeah.
So it's his theater. He operates it.
Well, his theater company, but the theater itself on
the theater he runs. He owns the theater because he uses it. There's a lot of photography work and theater. They have 7 different rooms, so you can do. A lot of people use it for photographic shootings. Plus, they have a rooftop. It's a very nice space. But he was with the Living Theater. And through that connection, I got to know Judith Molina very well from the Living Theater in later years. She was another person who really supported Epstein and Hassan. But the show itself, my wife and I, in terms of her being in the show, Naimah, later in her life, around 20 years ago, she became a Buddhist practitioner because she was searching for a religious thing. And
wait, you couldn't give her Judaism? She's married to a Jew. She look at you and go, "Oh, maybe that."
She actually she did check out the Kabbalah Center. That was as far as she went, but that kind of she was. I don't want to be negative about that.
That string is played out. Yeah.
So they made Kabbalah. Kabbalah is a very deep thing, and you can't do Kabbalah like Kabbalah light in a sense, like reading digest.
I think Kabbalah light, but religious. Yeah.
So. But anyway, so she became a Buddhist teacher, and she taught meditation for many years. And in the group that she was the teacher with, she was really the first African American Buddhist woman that she was one of the main teachers. And when she died, about a month before she died, when we started writing the show, she was in a nursing home in the Bronx.
Wait, this is the teacher, or this is Hassan?
This is Naimah. Naimah is a teacher also.
All right. Okay. So you're talking about Naimah again,
right? I'm back on Naimah. I'm always on Naimah,
as it were.
My soulmate dies. But anyway, what happened was she had been a Buddhist teacher, and about a month before she died, they videotaped Naimah in the nursing home. Naimah at this point was not able to move her body at all. She had a type of cancer that took away her ability to move, but her mind was very sharp. So they did 3 short teachings that she did, one on death, one on attachment, and one on pride while she was in the nursing home. And at the end of the show, I play the 3 videos. So Naimah is in the show teaching because that's what she was. She was also a New York City school teacher. That's how she made a living eventually. And Naimah was nominated for a Tony Award as the best theater arts teacher in New York City, which is a category that the Tonys have. So she had a lot of facets to her life. And that's really what the show is about. Because the show is called When Your Soulmate Dies, but it's based on the chapter, which is the last chapter of her life, which we wrote the last month as she was dying, which was called All They Can See Is an Old Black Woman in a Wheelchair.
Wait, wasn't that the original title of the show that you already did?
That was the original title. When we
so
did
it's sort of the same show.
The same show, but I've changed the name for marketing purposes.
Well, and she died.
No, really, just marketing purposes.
Yeah.
Because people are connected to the word soulmate much more than they are to an old. It was confusing to people. What does that mean? All that they can see is an old black woman in a wheelchair. But the point of that was that Naimah was a Tony-nominated school teacher in New York who worked with thousands of children that loved her. She was a Buddhist teacher. She was a brilliant comedian. But when she was in nursing homes and hospitals, they treated her like an old black woman in a wheelchair and treated her with unbelievable lack of dignity, an unbelievable lack of love and compassion. And I witnessed it for 1 year, how everyone is treated, especially in nursing.
It's probably not just that. It's just too few caregivers. They're not paying. And it's just
right, exactly.
And to be honest, they also know they're not going to get up and walk out of there and complain. They're just basically on the way out.
Well, that was their mistake, because what happened was, I witnessed things quickly. What was going on with Naimah and how she was being treated. So I was in that nursing home. She was in 3 nursing homes. But I was in there every day. I used to tell them that I'm a secret shopper. I'm always going to be here. You know, as long as I can come in. You don't know what hours I'm going to be here. And I was told at Bellevue by the social workers there that I was the best advocate for a partner they have ever seen. Because what I witnessed, as I tell people this all the time, it's not just black women that get treated bad in nursing homes. Rich people get treated bad. Poor people get treated bad. But if you're in a system that everybody's treated like shit, black women are going to get treated the shittiest, because this is still America. And that's the way it is. And I witnessed it. And I'm a very persistent person. I was a club manager for a really long time, and I'm not afraid to confront you. So I confronted people relentlessly there to make sure that Naimah got humane treatment, because the treatment, I'm not exaggerating, it's not humane. People are not given human dignity, and I know that they're understaffed, and I know that they have a lot of issues, but I also know that they, for example, they only need 1 nurse that's a registered nurse on the floor in a nursing home, just 1. Most of the people who they call nurses are really aides. Doctors have to be within distance of the nursing home, but they don't have to be on premises. The main thing that nursing homes need are accountants to add up the money that they're ripping off from Medicaid and Medicare. That's what they need. That's their only real concern. And I call them out on it. And I try to be, even in that situation, I'm always going to try to be respectful and polite. But if you're giving my wife Tylenol instead of what she needs, she had cancer.
And $10 a pill,
Well, what they tend to do a lot of times with, and this is something people can look up, because sometimes when I say this, people think I'm making this up. There's a big thing in the medical world where they believe that black women require less drugs than other people. This goes back to the 1850s, when black women were operated on without drugs. So Naimah was often being given stuff like Tylenol instead of OxyContin, which is when you have cancer, kidney failure, and COVID. Tylenol's not going to do the trick. So they always claim they're making mistakes. Like, that's the thing I talk about a lot in the show. It's always an honest mistake. They don't see color. You know, Naimah was when she went to an emergency room. I'm not going to say the hospital, because people have told me not to say the name, but they thought she was a homeless person. So they were going to give her basically no treatment, because what they do with homeless people is when they come in with COVID, they treat them in the emergency room, but they don't want them in the hospital. So they just release them back into the street. So this is a standard thing that goes on, or had been going on. So I witnessed all this. And as I told this nurse one time, who happened to be a Black woman, and she treated Naimah unbelievably bad. And I called her out on what she had said to Naimah. And she said to me that she was a nurse and she's Black, so she can't be racist. And I said to her that you dress as a nurse, you're wearing a nurse's outfit, but a nurse doesn't act the way you just acted towards my wife. Yeah. So I said to her, and you'll understand this term, I'm sure. I said, you're actually a capo. You're a capo for a for-profit medical company. And I explained to her that I've had people in my family that were in concentration camps. And when a Jewish person calls you a capo, it's the lowest thing that you can call a human being.
So first of all, stop right there. We've gotten so serious here. But who in your family? Let's get even more serious. Who the hell in your family was actually, tattooed? And who was?
I had cousins that were in concentration camps in Poland on my father's side. Who I grew up in Brooklyn. They lived, in Canarsie. That's where I grew up. Yeah. And I saw the numbers on the arms.
Did they tell stories, or did they shut up about it because they didn't?
One person, my cousin Betty, she was the most. She was like an artistic person. Like, there's not many artists in my family, but she was that kind of person. So she dealt with her feelings more. And she told me, she was a very pretty girl, and she told me about how things were in the concentration camps. But she also told me about what a capo was, and that, there really is no lower thing that you can call someone. But this nurse, to me, I wasn't using that expression, I want
you're a Nazi. No, you meant it's a very specific someone. If people don't know what a capo is, it's kind of Jews who are essentially functioning as functionaries for the Nazi guards. They're
right. You get an extra piece of bread.
Well, yeah.
That's what it came
Who knows in that situation if you wouldn't be? I mean,
I would hope, I don't, I hear what you're saying. I think that, I don't think I could ever be that person. I mean, I could do bad things. I've done a lot of bad things in my life.
Oh, like what? Besides the drugs. What have you done? What have you done?
I've I told this story because I also teach a meditation class, and part of, I told people that back in the 70s, before there was security cameras and all kinds of things in department stores, I love to read books. And I made a decision at some point in my life that taking a book from a department store didn't hurt anybody. There was nowadays, there are cameras, there's guards, you're not going to do that. But I kind of justified it to myself at that time that who am I hurting? A big company, it's one book and I'm reading it. But in later years, I learned that I still was stealing. And that is a sin, no matter, whether you're religious or not. It's wrong to steal. It's not yours. And by doing that, you're actually degrading yourself. So, when
I want to read a book, I go into the Amazon, look inside, it's free. I can read the first chapter. And I get, from most books, I get enough from the first chapter. And then I stop and nobody gets hurt. Nothing comes out of my pocket. And I read all I want of the book. America's wonderful right now in that very particular way. By the way, we're talking with Steve Epstein, of course, formerly of the duo Epstein and Hassan, a.k.a. the Black and the Jew, him being the Jew. Naimah Hassan, what was her English? What was her actual Janice English?
But she did say, after so many years of getting drilled by a Jew, that she had a lot of Jew in her.
Oh! See, that's a question I want to ask about when your soulmate dies, which is starting tonight at the Alchemical Theater on West 17th Street. And get your tickets at Ovation. Tickets is a way to get them online beforehand, or you can go to the blackandthejew.com website. But we were talking about these horrible things and the way she was treated and her dying and having kidney failure and all this. How do you make that entertaining and, I'm assuming on some level, a comic show, as opposed to just being a litany of, this is the healthcare system, this is the way
that was
housed,
That was the original, when we first wrote it, because she wrote it with me. So when we first wrote it, it was more about what you just said, a lot of anger. But then as I've worked on it through, for the period I've been working on it, I tell the stories of what happened to her in the nursing home in short clips, but then I go into Naimah, the school teacher, Naimah, the liberated Black woman, and then I go into a whole bunch of stuff about Epstein and Hassan. I do pieces from our show without her, and I sometimes bring audience members on, because Naimah had her signature piece for over 30 years of performing, where she would do a piece that it started out where she would say everybody deserves to come, including women, and she would have a piece where women in the audience would scream out that they love their clit. She led it as a kind of
mantra.
A mantra, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I get a woman from the audience to come up. I wrote, I have all Naimah's lines, and she does it that way to keep that alive. Because Naimah was very much, as I said, a person of the 70s and the 60s. And she was a person, the two biggest benefactors in our career, and I'm talking to a rabbi, right? So I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but one of them was a Jew, a great Jew, but often people misunderstood him. His name was Al Goldstein.
Oh, God bless the man. Yes, all right.
Rabbi Goldstein.
Yeah. And don't screw him. No, yeah, right.
He was a very big supporter of ours. He saw us perform once, and he became a big fan, and he gave us money to do our shows, and we worked at a lot of functions. And the other one was Larry Flint. And
so both Al Goldstein and Larry Flint were your best benefactors in a way.
Absolutely. So that's why, and I tell people this in the show, because we ended up being hosts at the Blue Angel Exotic Cabaret, which was the biggest downtown in the 90s. It was really the show that started the whole burlesque revival in New York. And we were the hosts of that show for a number of years. And then we hosted our own burlesque show called Shock and Aura Go-Go. And so we had a reputation in the pornography world that, we did a lot of shows for Goldstein and Flint. And when we were hosting the show at the Blue Angel, Naimah used to do a piece where she would say, when a Black woman marries a white man, sexual reparations must be paid. And when Larry Flint heard that, he said to her, you guys got like a lot of Richard Pryor and Lenny Bruce in you, and you should focus on that material, all that stuff. And we built a whole act basically around that concept of sexual reparations. The three words that white people hate, the three phrases: white supremacy, white privilege, and reparations. Those words, white people, it makes their dick shrink. They don't like to hear that.
And I've got no dick left to show, please. After born Jewish and then circumcision, please.
Yes, the circumcision thing is, I've always had an issue with that, but that's a whole other story. Because I held my nephew when he had his circumcision, and I was like, that was a grueling experience.
Oh, did you look, or were you like?
I just couldn't believe that I was doing this. But so our show always had that kind of flavor to it. But Larry Flint and Al Goldstein, I tell people in the show, like, most people see them as capitalist pig pornographers, which they were, but at the same time, they were very kind to us, and that was kind of rare in show business, because we had our little moments of being seen by people in the in the entertainment industry, and we were always too extreme for them.
I mean, if you're doing that kind of material in the late 1970s into the 80s, that's not going to get you on at that point, Carson or even Letterman.
Even later. See, I have a theory, which again, not everybody agrees with my theories, but we also talk about class in our show. I mean, it's really three things: race, sex, and class. And class is the one thing that in American entertainment, you're not really allowed to discuss, because people make money off advertising. So if you go on and talk about how the American pharmaceutical industry are total gangsters, you're not going to go on CNN, because CNN, all their advertising comes from the
Cymbalta, and so right, yeah.
So I have two sides to my family, my mother's side and my father's side. On one side of my family, my grandmother was a hardcore socialist, and she raised me with raised me with my parents, but she was a hardcore socialist, and she's buried in a cemetery on Long Island where Jewish labor people and So unlike a lot of Jewish people through the years who moved more towards the right politically, I moved more towards the left politically. And that's not, and so was Naimah. So in
No,
our
that's happened in the past only 20-something years of this whole
well,
Jew
yeah,
going
I
towards.
actually don't like it. You know, it's one of these things that I don't like because my grandmother was a very, she was definitely a Zionist as well, but a socialist Zionist.
All right, all right. No, one of the things that is a problem
But,
with the left is that they're becoming so anti-Israel, and I'm like, yeah,
right.
you know what? When it comes to Israel, I'm with Newt Gingrich and George, God help me, George W. Bush and Donald Trump. They're kind of more Zionist than some people I'm seeing at shul. This is not good. I know.
Well, that's what was definitely happened but there was a real leftist movement originally when Israel began with the kibbutzes and
Yeah.
so that was what I heard a lot growing up from my grandmother. And and so in terms of American entertainment, you can talk about race and sex, but
I
you
do.
can't talk about class.
Yeah.
And go and
The
that's
thing is,
you can
I
talk
don't
about
have
it.
any class at
You
all.
can talk about it, but you'll be on West 17th Street on the 12th floor
So
or in a basement somewhere.
now, by the way, you have a day job or a night job. Actually, you still work for on some of the jazz industry, don't you? Or you
No.
retired? No. Oh,
Well, what happened was when COVID hit a couple of years ago, I decided that, there was a lot of problems with people in masks and fights at the door, and it was just not pleasant to me anymore. So I stopped, and the other thing is for the year and a half that Naimah was in nursing homes and hospitals, my job was being there every day. The only time I wasn't with her in the whole year and a half she was sick was when I had COVID for a week.
right. Yeah.
That was it.
So did her pension? I mean, what was paying her hospital bills or nursing home bills?
Well, she was over 65.
Yeah.
So whatever they call it. I always get mixed up with Medicaid and Medicare, but one of them.
Both. Yeah.
No, she had bills, but it wasn't the government pays for most of
At least
when you're over 65.
Yeah.
So,
but what are you doing now? What are you doing with your non-Showtime days now? Are you fairly?
I have a 2-hour a day job. Can you hear me?
Yeah. 2-hour a day job.
2-hour a day job. I do tours of Greenwich Village, or I do what they call the Soho Little Italy Chinatown tour. So those jobs work. You do 2 hours. I won't mention my company's name, but I work for a major tour company in New York City. See, the tour company business has changed a lot. Years ago, like individuals basically did a tour.
Right.
But now that's not the way it works. It works like my company hires the tour guides, other people sell the tours. So they're like a personnel basically and I'm
It's like they're the mafia of sidewalk tour.
Yeah, one of them. There's a number of companies that do it, but they're not necessarily even in New York. Like the company's offices may not even be here. It's like anything else in the current economic system. Everybody's got their hand in the pie, but it's a good job for a performer because it's 2 hours. I live in Greenwich Village for over 40 years. I love Greenwich Village. I've worked in Greenwich Village all my jobs. And I love the politics of Greenwich Village because this is this is where the gay rights movement began. This is where the labor movement began. This is where the women's liberation movement began in Greenwich Village.
Right.
And so I like talking about that and just telling people about that. But I also do the other tour, which is Soho, Chinatown, Little Italy, which is more about showing people architecture. Chinatown is, I explain to them the great love that Jews have for Chinese food. I mean, that is one of the great and then they love it, because
someone re-explained this to me just the other day. They said the main thing is if you're a Jew and you're hungry and it's Christmas, what the hell do you do? You don't want to cook because you're Jewish and lazy. No, it's like I need food and I need food. What's going to be open? The Chinese place. God bless them for this.
And I will say this again, because I'm a kind of, I always try to see why people make certain moves. My parents were the first generation of Americans. And again, some people in their family were very religious. There were rabbis, grandparents that were very religious in Eastern Europe. So when they came here, my parents, like were a lot of Americans at that time in the 50s, that they wanted to be Americans. And they kept their Jewish identity, but eating Chinese food was like a rebellious maneuver because you were eating non-kosher. And it was their way to be rebellious, that they were not like the old country. They were now Americans. And it was a kind of, I'm not saying it's harmless or not, because if people are religious, to them, it's not harmless. But to my parents, you couldn't be more identified as a Jew than my mother, but she did eat Chinese food.
Yeah.
We had relatives that
Different generation would win Taco Bell,
I always found I had one relative who would eat Chinese food, but on paper plates in her house. Like, she wouldn't use her dishes.
Right.
So there were, people have levels of their own thing,
everybody's got an envelope, how much they put, and it's
right.
It's pork. I'm eating pork, but it's not with our silverware.
Right.
It goes
to me, that was always a little bit of a, I don't want to be too judgmental, but I never, that one, if you're eating pork, you're eating pork.
Or shrimp or something. But the mentality is, all right, God doesn't see me while I'm eating it. So I put away the things I'm eating on. It goes in the garbage, and then once I poop, it's forgotten. I've just been eating kosher all week.
Exactly. I think for me, I made my own thing. In my mind, it was like health related. When people were eating pig, they were probably dying a lot, thousands of years ago, and people probably made that a religious thing. It wasn't like that God had, like, he hates cows, but he can eat, he loves pigs, but he hates cows, so, because you can eat a cow, but you couldn't eat a pig.
And it was really, this with a hoof you can, this without a hoof you can't, and then the fish, this fish is fine, but this fish has a strange backbone. Don't eat it. Some of it's nonsense, and some of it was, back then, if you miscooked a shrimp,
right,
you're dead. So
that's my theory. That's my theory. I think that it was all based similar to even things like gayness. And maybe at one time in past history, there was something like AIDS, maybe thousands of years ago, and people said, that's not good behavior. That's dangerous behavior. I don't know. Like, I just, I'm a person that I like
also, let's face it, if you woke up on a Sunday morning and your toga, and there was red stains on the back of your toga, it didn't look nice. If your toga was bleeding through the toga, and people saw this, and it's like, what? Maybe the gay thing shouldn't.
That could be true. You don't know. You never really know how things start. It's hard to know what got people motivated.
Well, we know how your show is starting. It's starting tonight, Steve Epstein.
Tonight.
The show is called When Your Soulmate Dies, and it's running. How often a week is it?
Just once a week, every Saturday night. Every Saturday going into June.
Yeah, going into June 24th. So far is the last time you have set for it at the Alchemical Theater, 50 West 17th Street. So I guess it's somewhat near 6th Avenue.
Yes, it's right between 6th and Broadway. It's in an office building. They have the whole 12th floor.
Whoa.
It's a giant. Wow. They have a lot of space. They have a lot of different size rooms. Like, there's some rooms are 20 seats, some rooms are 70 seats. And they do different things. That they just opened there because they were on 14th Street for many years, but we need more high-priced condos on 14th Street. So they knocked the building down where the theater was. So, because we don't have enough. There's not enough high-priced condos in Manhattan. So,
yeah. Well, actually, with more people working from home instead, they need fewer office buildings now, and just more.
That's true.
People live, but I want to remind people you can get your tickets from Ovation Tickets, or just go to the box office, or go to the blackandthejew.com.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, and because I know you have to go. I know you've got rehearsal or whenever you got to do tech and stuff. But one more question for Steve Epstein, who you're going to go see tonight, and When Your Soulmate Dies. Tell us one more story about your years in the jazz club, because Sweet Basil had a lot of jazz players, and then you worked at not the Iridium. What was the
I worked at the Blue Note.
Yeah.
I worked at the Knitting Factory.
So do you have stories? Tell us a funny, bad, wonderful, any kind of story about someone, like some notable.
Well, she's sort of a notable. I could tell you this story. See, at the Blue Note is a very different situation than other jazz clubs. The Blue Note is probably the most successful jazz business in the history of jazz. It was purchased in the it's on West 3rd Street in Greenwich Village. And in the late 1970s, an Israeli family purchased the building. And they have been unbelievably brilliant entrepreneurs, because in the 1980s they turned they franchised the name the Blue Note into Japan, and Japan is by far the biggest jazz supporting group in the world. Nobody's even close. So the Blue Note has a number of Blue Notes in Japan, and then they eventually had Blue Notes in many other cities and countries. They eventually became partners with B.B. King and the B.B. King Blues Bar, the one that was on 42nd Street, because B.B. King used to play at the Blue Note. So my point is that these are super good business people, and they had a lot of perception into, because not many people have made money on jazz. They've made a lot of money on jazz. But one of the things when you're a manager there, they have a very strict guest policy. It's a small club, maybe seats 200, 250 people. You squeeze them in there. But if you're not like if you're in the band, that doesn't mean you get guests, which is very unusual. And they charge a high cover charge. So one of the main challenges of that job is that people are always trying to get guests, and you can't. It's just not, you're not allowed. You don't have much leeway with them.
Wow.
So anyway, to make a long story short, one night, and this included so-called celebrities. So one night, there was a woman who, at that time in New York, she had kind of had a TV show. Her name was Star Jones. I don't know.
She was on The View for
okay, well,
yeah.
So she comes over to me one night after the show and goes, because she got charged a cover charge, and she used the expression that I hate more than any expression when people use it towards me. She goes, "Do you know who I am?" So my response, because I am a comedian, was, "I do know who you are, and that's why I charged you a cover charge."
All right.
Because people come in there that were celebrities, like the most gracious of all, the great Tony Bennett, Bette Midler. They didn't ask to be guests. They just pay their check. So as soon as you tell me, if you tell me that you're a celebrity, if I mean, who are you? I'm like a real, so anyway, those kind of experiences, I've seen a lot of things that I won't get into about people having sex in the bathroom and stuff like that.
Oh, do tell. Come on. You mean famous or just people having sex in the bathroom?
No, famous people.
Oh, come on. Are they, if they're dead, you can say it. Are they still alive?
Well, there's also, I just wouldn't say it. Certain things, like I don't mind saying, because she brought it on herself. Because you know who you are? You're just a person. Like that's the thing.
Wait, who are you talking about? The sex girl or Star Jones?
No, Star Jones.
Oh, Star Jones. Yeah,
right. Human being.
Yeah.
The thing I love most about Naimah Hassan was that Naimah Hassan was the kindest person. And you can always tell how a person is by how they treat people who are so-called beneath them, service people. If you go into restaurants, or if you're not nice to people who clean the toilets when you're in a building, that tells me what kind of human being you are. And I
am extra nice to people who clean the toilet after me, because I know they've got a terrible.
You know what? That doesn't surprise me. I don't know why. I just feel that. I can feel that coming from you.
And believe me, I have tried this thing of, do you know who I am? And every time I do that, they punch me because they know. So this is what happens.
So that's my thing. My major thing when I was an MC in clubs was that because we would sell products between sets, like I would sell Sweet Basil T-shirts, Sweet Basil. So I'd have people model, and I'd mess around a lot.
That's good.
That was really my show business experience. I'm good at work. I'm good. Naimah was super talented. She could act, she could dance, she could sing. I'm just I'm a quick Jew. That's my only skill. I used to tell people, for Jews, being quick is our boxing.
Yes.
Like if you're a funny guy. I grew up in Brooklyn with a lot of Italians, Blacks, Puerto Ricans, and Jews. And the reason I didn't get my ass kicked was because I was funny. If you're not funny, you got to have like a talent, I mean, and that was my, I've always been quick-witted.
But it's so important that you're obviously a storyteller and a raconteur, and that comes through. And so if you're hosting or what would you even say? You're doing a solo-ish show, collaborated with by the late Naimah Hassan. But this idea of being able to tell stories to be funny and also angry and interesting and sad, and to engage the audience as you're going to do, to have women come up and talking about their clitori. This is a wonderful thing. So yes.
And the other thing I would just like to say, my final thing I'll say
Please.
is this: the show is a love story to my wife. I love Naimah Hassan. I have so much respect for her. And I wrote this show because I was in pain seeing how she was treated. And I want people to know who she is because I love her so much. Like what I've realized is when your soulmate dies, it's not the end.
And, I mean, do you still?
For me and her.
So do you?
I'll see her and I'll see her again.
Yeah. Well, oh, you mean when in the other?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I pray that you, and I never pray, but I pray that you do, and I pray that you have great success. Are you working? I'll ask you one more question. You're doing this for? Are you working on another? I mean, is this the last?
I have a number of things that I because I want to perform, and I thought a lot. People thought I would go back to doing like stand-up comedy, but I really don't want to do stand-up comedy in the sense that I really want to talk. I want to do comedy, but I don't want to do it like. I know what goes on in comedy clubs, in New York and LA. I'm not really into doing that scene. And I wasn't into it years ago, and I'm definitely not into it now. So there are things that I do want to talk about. I actually have a show in mind that I do want to talk about, which, is, it came to me, and I'll just give it to you quick. I was walking through Washington Square Park recently, and there's a very large Hasidic presence in Washington Square Park because the Lubavitcher parked their truck. Oh yeah. And so this guy came over to me and he asked me, which I've heard before, are you Jewish? Like they'll ask you as you're walking through, are you Jewish? And when he asked me that, he was surprised by my answer because I said, that's a very deep question. And I said, you know what? I'm going to think about that a lot, and I'm going to try to think if I can do at another point in the future a show based on that. Like, what does that actually mean? Are you Jewish?
I will point you to after you do your show tonight, because today is going to be focused, of course, on when your soulmate dies. But there's a little bit of a show you may have heard of this called Shalom Damn It, an evening with Rabbi Sol Solomon that you can watch.
Okay, no, I'm going to. Is it on the?
It's on YouTube. Just look for it on YouTube. It's all about being Jewish in modern America, and the guy who did it is a genius. So you really got to watch this. It's brilliant.
I'm sure that it's a funny thing because when I started doing this show, I was thinking, I wonder if anybody's ever done a show before about their partner dying. So I investigated it, and there's been a number of people who've done it. But in 2001, the very famous writer from Los Angeles, oh man, now I'm spacing on her name, Joan Didion. Yes. She wrote a show about her husband dying, but she didn't do it herself. Vanessa Redgrave performed it. It was a one-person show. Yeah. But it's based on that thing. So when you just said that, like whenever somebody has an idea, I have a thought, somebody else had that idea.
But as long as you do it differently, you're not talking about Bill Styron or
There's no idea that's just yours, like it's in the universe, kind of. Yeah. And when he said that to me, because it really is an interesting question, because what does that mean? Being Jewish it's very tricky in a sense. What does it mean? My mother was an unbelievably Jewish woman, yet she didn't. She ate pork. So it's a kind of interesting thing because the Hasidim in the park, they have a view of what Jewish means. They have their own view of what being Jewish means.
Right.
And they dress the part. So you give them a little bit more credit.
Well, no, they dress their idea of the part. There's Jews in Israel who do different kinds of yarmulkes, different things. Absolutely. They're dressing their idea. I'm dressing my idea of the part.
Me too. This is my idea.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm dressing it too.
Well, but see, you got it because the hoodie is more schwarz, it's more black. But the rest of it, but that's a nod to Naimah, right? So you got the hoodie for the black and the black suit for the Jew. It mixes together perfect.
Perfect.
Everybody, go see When Your Soulmate Dies at the Alchemical Theater, starting tonight over on West 17th Street. Steve Epstein, I'm going to last thing. What is your Hebrew name when you were bar mitzvah? What do you have a Hebrew name?
Shepsel.
Shepsel, was it?
Well, I think that's more like my Yiddish name.
Right, all right, Shepsel.
My grandmother called me Shepsel.
Shepsel, Krantz, Epstein. Yeah.
I was named after her brother, so Shepsel.
Shepsel, it has been absolutely a marvelous, wonderful thing. We hope to have you back in the neighborhood when you work on your next show. Success on this show, and all good things, and love to your late wife too.
Thank you, Rabbi. I haven't been with a rabbi on a Saturday morning in a long time, so
painless, wasn't it? Yeah,
very painless. It was a lot of fun. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Likewise, and shalom to you.
Thank you.
Bye bye. I'm gonna let you go in kind of a Zoom sort of way. So
okay, goodbye.
Oh, yes, ladies and gentlemen, wasn't that absolutely delightful? Ladies and gentlemen, we had in the neighborhood Steve Epstein talking seriously and also comedically and in a jazzy sort of way about his show, When Your Soulmate Dies. Well, my soulmate, Dave, is still here. He's waiting to get back on the air to do the rest of the Dave's Gone By program, which this is. It's the 887th episode, which this is, and it's got more stuff to do. So I'm going to play more music and then bring on the great Dave to continue this program of the air.